Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. It is the evening before January 6th, and I was thinking about where I was and what I was thinking on January 5th, 2021. I could make the case that I fully expected that what happened the next day was going to happen, but like I think a lot of Americans, it came as such a shock. What I do remember though is sitting at home and telling my wife that I wasn't going to spend too much time watching the election returns because I simply assumed the Republicans were going to win those Senate elections in Georgia. And so as I'm scrolling through Twitter, which of course is where all information comes from, it began to dawn on me like, no, my God. And I remembered, I dug up a tweet from Denver Riggleman, the former congressman who's now on the staff of the January 6th committee. And on the evening of January 5th, he tweeted out, "My fear from years of military intelligence experience is this. How does this coalition of the insane react tomorrow if it looks like the Dems won Georgia? The call to revolt is based on dehumanizing theories and messianic themes. It's merging into a conspiracy sticky bomb with a short fuse." And of course, we all know what happened the next day. And we are joined on today's podcast by Olivia Nuzzi, who is the Washington correspondent for New York Magazine. And first of all, Olivia, happy birthday, because your birthday is January 6th. You share January 6th as well. We're never going to forget your birthday from now on, I guess.
My sister-in-law's birthday is 9/11, and I think hers is worse. But I've been contemplating perhaps I should change it to a different day or something because it feels like impossible to to associate this date with anything else for the rest of time now.
So I want to talk to you about your absolutely hilarious and fascinating and incredibly insightful piece about Dr. Oz in the magazine. But one of the things I really like about your reporting, Olivia, is that you report about the reporting, that you tell the story about writing the story. And I think a lot of listeners will remember your back and forth about Rudy Giuliani, where you were texting buddies with Rudy for a while. Right? I mean, before he's blocked you now, right?
Yeah, he blocked me on Twitter, which I think is new. I mean, people kept sending me a tweet of his, I think a week ago, and I clicked on it finally, and I couldn't see it, and then I realized that he blocked me. But I mean, texting buddies, I don't know if I would go that far, but it was, not difficult to get his various phone numbers, as we all know. And he just was very free in how he'd respond. And I initially, I did a story about him texting. And so that's how the process of the behind the scenes stuff was sort of the point of that story. It was all about his phone comportment. And that's where that really started, and then it kind of just turned into an ongoing drama with whether or not Rudy was talking to me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I certainly didn't mean to imply that you were buddies in any way
No,
whatsoever.
no.
That, like my buddy Dan Bongino or something like that, or my buddy Tucker Carlson. But so, do you have any overarching theory about what happened to Rudy Giuliani? I just find it such an extraordinary story because obviously, had he passed away in the a few years after 9/11, we'd have schools named after him in every city. There'd be statues of him. The airport might have been named after him. And now he's kind of a punchline. I mean, you've interacted with him. What do you think? What do you think happened? What goes on in his mind?
It's well, his direct quote to me when I asked him about his legacy was, quote, "My opinion of my legacy is fuck it." He is just not preoccupied with that, and I think it's something when I first started approaching the tragedy of Rudy Giuliani, of what had become of him, I thought that I guess I thought I would find a satisfying answer to the question that you're asking me
Yeah.
now. And what I've sort of found is that the people who ask that question, or the people who refuse to believe that it could be as simple as it looks, that this is someone who just wanted proximity to power, who just wanted money, who just wants attention, oftentimes are people who knew him very well or worked for him at the height, or before the decline became visible. And they, I think, to admit that it is that simple would be to kind of admit something fundamentally disgusting about the business of politics
Yeah.
and fundamentally shallow about this world. And I think that's very difficult for many people for obvious reasons. And so I still talk to people who believe that there must be some sort of reason that would satisfy them to explain what has happened to him. But I really think that it is, whether or not it's true that there is some sort of mental decline or some sort of dependence on substances, I think it is still true that this is someone who's motivated by greed and selfishness and a desire for attention.
And not much more complicated than that. I think sometimes we search for these overarching explanations to explain the shock of reality in his particular case. So let's shift to your incredible piece about Dr. Oz, because I also think that, I mean, I think it's, first of all, it's a hilarious piece, it's an interesting piece, but also really very much an artifact of our time that a guy like Dr. Oz is running for the United States Senate and is taken seriously. So can we just start by walking through the story, is because you tell this story of driving to a strip mall in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, where Dr. Oz supposedly has his campaign headquarters. What did you find there? Because it sort of had a Four Seasons vibe to it, didn't it?
It did. I mean, it was not far. I realized actually while I was driving there that I had driven through some of the same streets while I was working on a story about Four Seasons total landscaping,
Mhm.
in search of someone who worked there. I think I was knocking on doors or something. And but it did have very much that vibe. And I considered stopping by Four Seasons and saying hello to the people there, but I didn't have time to. But I found not much. I mean, it's very early in the campaign, and so I want to be fair. You know, it's not as though there should be some big get out the vote effort a couple days into a Senate campaign, but there were just very few signs of life at the alleged headquarters for this operation, and it led me to because I had failed to reach the campaign and the candidate through the like official channels that I try to respect when I go about reporting on a profile. I figured I would, before I left town, I would reach out to the Oz's directly, and that led to a sort of ridiculous scene involving Mrs. Oz failing to hang up the phone on me.
Oh, God, this is one of those amazing stories. First of all, the technological "be careful" story. So basically, you meet this handyman painter who calls Oz's father-in-law to help you get connected with the campaign, right? The call's not returned. So you decide to call Lisa Oz directly, who's a self-help author, the wife of Dr. Oz. So tell me about the phone call. So you're calling the wife, and what happens?
Well, you know, I don't know how other reporters feel, but like I never want to start out by calling the wife. You know, I figure I'll go through official channels first. I'll try and reach the candidate, then his or herself, and then maybe as a last resort, I'll go through other people involved or associated with the candidate. And I finally had reached that point. I was on a deadline, and I called her, and we I thought maybe we were disconnected or she hung up. I wasn't sure, so I called her back. And then it was very clear she was very annoyed to be hearing from me. Um, and she attempted to hang up on me very soon after the call started. And then and I was about to hang up myself, and then I realized I heard her talking, and I was very confused because she was talking about me. And I said sort of like, hello? And nobody answered. But then Dr. Oz, his voice is unmistakable to me. I grew up watching his show. He came on the line, and it became clear that she had obviously mistakenly like connected the phone to the car that they were in. To
So
their
the phone line doesn't disconnect. So you're listening into this bizarre back and forth between Dr. Oz and his wife.
Yeah. I was trying to interject because I was still hopeful at this point that they would cooperate with me and that they would, do an interview and have me come around the state with them as they were starting out the campaign. So I was very much kind of a naive optimist approaching them looking for access for my story. And I was totally, I mean, I was sort of sitting there in my like rental car with my jaw on the floor listening to this for 4.5 minutes.
Well, listening to them describe you as this fucking girl reporter. What?
Yeah.
What were they all worked up about? They were worked up because you'd interviewed a friend of this couple named Michelle, right? And they were upset about this. I mean, we're going to get to the substance of it, but this story is so amazing that they're having this paranoid discussion about you and about what their friend told you. And you're listening in on all this, and they are unsophisticated enough to realize that they're broadcasting all of this.
Yeah, and look, these are two very smart people. Dr. Oz is has all of these, Ivy League degrees. He's obviously a brilliant man in this one area, or maybe more than one area. Maybe not in politics. I guess time will tell. His wife claims to be a member of Mensa, um, and so I was sort of sitting there thinking, these are two geniuses. Surely
Sure, right.
but it's also I mean, isn't it your worst nightmare that, you hang up the phone with somebody, or you get into your car after being at a party or something, and you go to talk shit about them to your spouse or your friend, and they're listening? So part of me was just like, "Oh, yikes, this is such a nightmare." But I was also really upset by it because they were lying about me. They were, accusing me of having lied, to the painter that you mentioned, John Palma, and they were referencing an accusation that Corey Lewandowski had made about me a couple of years ago. That is not true, and it was sort of upsetting to hear. I mean, I know some people. If you watch the new season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, the first episode is someone hosting his own funeral. And attending it and wanting to hear what people have to say about him. I'm like the opposite of that. I don't want to hear what people have to say about me. And so I found it kind of horrifying and upsetting, and I was like very disturbed by it. And it
And
took
yet
me a
it
while to view it as a positive thing in terms of material.
And yet it made for a great story. I mean, this was material. Let's just step back a bit about just setting the scene for why Dr. Oz is running for the United States Senate. So the designated Trumpy candidate in Pennsylvania was Sean Parnell. And he was forced to drop out of the race in late November after these accusations of child and spousal abuse from his ex-wife. And Dr. Oz gets into this race 8 days later. And as you write, he gets into the race advertising himself with a combination of MAGA slogans, medical puns, and references to his own brand. So he releases an ad from a group that made ads for Trump. He goes on Hannity, goes on Newsmax. Um, but, let's talk about how his campaign rolls out. In your story, you kind of shift gears after this episode of the conversation in the car to point out that Dr. Oz, the whole Dr. Oz phenomenon is part of the Oprah Winfrey phenomenon, and you described this that all I know for sure is that my mother met Oprah Winfrey before I met my mother, and for the duration of her brief life, no deity or dignity inspired in her such sustained faithfulness. So Oprah and Oprah's world was always part of your world. Talk to me about that because I think again Oprah Winfrey as a cultural phenomenon, and then Dr. Oz trailing in her wake.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up watching Oprah every day at 4 o'clock, and to the extent that I know for sure that this article would not exist without Oprah Winfrey, because it was while I was watching Oprah Winfrey that I first became interested in politics. Not even because of Oprah, but because Eyewitness News cut in with Governor Jim McGreevy's press conference in which he resigned when I was like 11, and that sparked my obsession with politics, and it was because of that that I
Huh.
got involved in politics and eventually political media and ended up at New York Magazine. So I can say with certainty that watching Oprah directly led to my article about Dr. Oz. And I grew up, watching her and then paying attention to the other, experts that she would bring into her viewers' lives, whether it was Dr. Phil or Susie Orman or Nate Berkus, an interior designer, or Dr. Oz is probably the most important one in my household because my mother was very health conscious and interested in whatever new age dietary advice anyone had to tell her. And so when I went about researching this story, I mean, part of my interest in doing the story to begin with was I felt when I saw the initial kind of rumbling about him perhaps getting involved in the race, I saw a lot of sneering
Hmm.
from our colleagues in the media. And I kind of thought, well, this seems like a pretty bad miscalculation. And it seems like dismissing all the people who grew up watching him or who have a high opinion of him, regardless of what John Oliver says or Claire McCaskill says. And I thought that I sort of had an understanding of that, and that was my motivation for doing the story to begin.
Well, I think this is crucial because as I look back on the Trumpian phenomenon, the thing that I missed, and I think a lot of people in political media missed, was that we were rolling our eyes at Donald Trump, but tens of millions of people had been watching him on The Apprentice for years, and we didn't fully understand the impact of that. As you point out, your mom was not alone. I mean, when Oprah recommends a book, millions of people read it. When she tries a diet, people adopt it, right? I mean, and so when Oprah said, "Here's my friend Dr. Oz, who is this brilliant cardiac surgeon, he's got this beautiful family," I mean, people paid attention, and he was a major cultural figure here, right? I mean, and he had all of these tips for eating, losing weight, looking for superfoods and everything. So just give me your sense about who he was at that time, because you describe him. Oprah asked another daytime host about Oz before bringing him on, and she was told, you report, that he's really smart, a great looking guy who had that it factor. So he becomes a regular, and then he gets his own show. I mean, how big was he?
I mean, at the time that he launched, I was looking at some of the ratings from that time, and he was averaging something like more than 3 million viewers in the afternoon when his own show launched, and that's an incredible number for the middle of the afternoon to look back on now in this era when comparatively nobody's watching television. And I didn't make this. I mean, I made the connection between The Apprentice and Dr. Oz in the piece, but I didn't make the connection that this is the same era of television that we're talking about. 2003, 2004, 2005. That is when The Apprentice was, launching and reaching its peak as well. And The Apprentice, I mean, I grew up watching that as well. I remember kids telling
Hmm.
each other you're fired on the playground. And we're also looking at a time period where the obesity epidemic is becoming more and more something that we're aware of. And I think people were really looking for guidance and looking for, answers. And I know in my house, he was incredibly well respected. And I mean, he had mainstream credentials. He was at Columbia Presbyterian. He'd gone to Harvard. He'd gone to Penn. He had a business degree from Wharton in addition to a medical degree. He was an incredibly well respected surgeon. And so there was no reason to think, this is a con artist or someone selling snake oil. Not at that time.
So what happened there? Because, he had it all going for him in that particular way, and then was it a gradual process that he began peddling the snake oil, that he became this scam artist? You talk to a daytime producer, says he went from being a doctor to a scam artist who can't be trusted. He thinks he has some divine power. So what was going on with him? I mean, what was driving that ambition?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, my best understanding of it is that, I write in the piece that consistency is the thief of content. And what I meant by
Hmm.
that is that to sustain the Dr. Oz brand, which not was not just a TV show, but a podcast, a radio show, dozens of books, a magazine, dozens of articles written for other magazines, other publications, appearances on Oprah, appearances on Late Night. He's in Men's Health. He's in Time. It's an astounding amount of material, and to sustain that, to continue to feed that machine, you need information. You need
Hmm.
what to tell people, frankly. And I found, because I figured, okay, well, while I do this piece, I'm going to revisit some of his advice, and I'm going to, try and follow his dietary and lifestyle advice for the duration of this reporting. I'm bored anyway. It's something to do. At the very least, it'll be something to write about. And I think it'll give me a better understanding of the nature of his advice and whether or not it's any good. And I figured, well, easy. He's written so many books. He's written so many articles. He's talked about it for 2 decades. It'll be very simple to figure out what to do. And Actually, what I found was that it was almost impossible to figure out what he allegedly does himself, what type of advice
Hmm.
or diet he follows, because he's constantly changing what he claims he adheres to. And so sometimes he's intermittent fasting, sometimes he's not eating fish, sometimes he's a vegan, sometimes he's doing this type of exercise or that type of exercise. It was very difficult to figure out how he lives and how he eats. And I figured it was because he just needs to continue to update people with new information in order to feed this beast of the Dr. Oz machine. And so I think, I was talking to a former producer on the show who was talking about how at the time that they started, there was a lot of anxiety. The whole place seemed to be humming with anxiety because Dr. Oz had been brought before Congress already and reprimanded for having hyped
Yeah.
miracle weight loss cures and miracle substances. And so people were very nervous, and Dr. Oz was very nervous about overstating any claim or coming across as scammy. And then over time, that started to sort of fade away, and suddenly Dr. Oz is trying to incorporate true crime on the show, and then he's doing it twice a week and three times a week. And it's because that's what's hot right now, and he needs higher ratings because the ratings are starting to fall off. And there was just sort of a this person described him as quote just wanting to fucking win.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
one of his former producers, right? Said
yeah, yeah,
what was not a shock that he was running for office because that's what motivates him. He just wants to fucking win.
yeah, and there are people who are wired that way. Who just want whatever they're doing, whether it is heart surgery or television or running for office, they are just hardwired in that competitive way. And it seems like he is. Now, I mean, I could psychoanalyze him. I didn't do this in the piece, and
Hmm.
talk about his relationship with his father, who died a couple of years ago, who he was never good enough for. He talked about that a bit publicly. He talked about it with Frank Bruni in the New York Times Magazine in 2010, I believe. His father, he told Bruni the story about how his father, when he made it onto the Times most influential list, his father's reaction was to ask him what number he was because he thought it was a ranking.
Oh,
So
really?
that sort of
Okay.
tells you the type of worldview that he was raised with.
Okay, so now he's jumped into this Senate race, and Republicans really don't know what to make of him, and a lot of Republicans are not happy with his new career ambitions. And this is what you write: an elite pro-choice, anti-gun, transgender child supporting, Michelle Obama hugging Muslim carpetbagger and Turkish army veteran who once announced on national television that his testicles descend in such a way that his penis curves to the left. That's a sample of the data conservative Republicans cite as proof that Dr. Oz is a threat to their plans to win the Senate in 2022. And that's just what they've identified in the vast public record available courtesy of Dr. Oz himself. The Oppo researchers have barely started. Again, how is this playing out? He's had kind of a rocky entry into the race. Clearly has got a lot of skeptics. He went on television. He was, asked about, his pro-life positions, and he didn't handle it that well, did he?
No, he didn't. He came at the question very self-assured at first, and kind of rattled off clearly what he had decided was a satisfying answer to this, which is that he's pro-life with three exceptions. Um, and the host on Fox did not respond well to that, and pressed him for more information for when exactly life begins. And he just completely screwed it up, and it became sort of a viral moment. But before even that, I mean, I had operatives, people sending me tweets of his with his calling for more action on guns or praising Michelle Obama for her anti-obesity efforts. All of that stuff was circulating among the kind of far right operative base. And I was very dismissive of this at first when I first started reporting on this because I thought, well, Trump wasn't a pure conservative, right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
people got over that pretty fucking quickly.
Hmm.
Um, but Dr. Oz has just not been identified as the guy this time around. The guy is David McCormick, who is a hedge fund. guy married to Dina Powell, the Goldman Sachs alum who worked for Donald Trump briefly. And he is broadly viewed as the person who will inherit Sean Parnell's MAGA support, and he has a whole fleet of former Trump White House staffers ready to work for him. So,
You have an interesting characterization of McCormick. Now he hasn't announced, right? He's expected to announce
yeah,
imminently in any day now.
yeah,
So you're right. In Trump world, McCormick is widely seen as a man with an inconvenient background who might pan out anyway. I hate to say this, but if you're not willing to go full retard in a Republican primary right now, it's hard. The expectations are what they are, says a MAGA operative involved in the Pennsylvania race. He's got an uphill battle as a hedge fund CEO, but he's done a good job so far. So that raised a lot of eyebrows that they're saying that, that right now the requirement was that sort of a reference to what's going on in Ohio, the Josh Mandel, JD Vance race to who can pander the most stupidly to the MAGA base.
I mean, I think it's a reference more broadly to what it has required in the Trump era to get ahead on the right. It wasn't specifically about Ohio, um, but it just spoke to me when I heard that come out of that person's mouth. I was like, man, I have not heard a more cynical, more clear-eyed assessment from someone involved about what the deal is on the right now for people running in a primary.
So this Pennsylvania race, I mean, this is kind of crucial, obviously, for Republicans to win the Senate. Looking to replace Senator Toomey. Now, talk to me about the political scheme here, because you point out, obviously he wants to, woo suburban women who've been his fan base for 20 years. And you write that he's got to prove to the party that he won't fuck up their plans to win back the Senate. And so his plan is, as you point out, to get these Parnell supporters and cash in on the celebrity, win moderates with college degrees, and then promote his Trumpism. I mean, that seems like a very, very complicated needle to thread.
It is. I mean, I think it's important to everyone that I talked to who was watching this closely and has involved in Republican politics was stressing to me that Pennsylvania is not Virginia, and to pull off what Youngkin pulled off in Virginia
Yeah.
is not as easy a feat there because the primary is so much more difficult. You can't just kind of bulldoze through a primary and then delicately handle who you appeal to and whose support you embrace during a general and hope that the dance works out and you pull it off. Here, you have to make a much more full-throated appeal to the right-wing base, and of course, that's the very thing that could kill you in a general. And so, while I talked to Democrats who were very nervous about Oz,
They are.
and
Hmm.
trying to stress to other Democrats that they shouldn't be underestimating him, and that it's a mistake to kind of do with him what they did with Trump, basically. And I think that's fair, but I also think it's going to be very, very difficult for him to pull this off in the primary. There is just a lot of skepticism of him. And like Trump, he has a record, going back a few decades of public statements that can be wielded against him and are being wielded against him
And
now.
will be.
Yeah, it's just a question of, does he have the quality that Trump had that allowed him to pull it off anyway? And I don't know that he does. He hasn't. I mean, this is a superficial, completely unscientific observation, but when you do watch him in these appearances, in the most softballiest of softball interviews, he has a sort of anxiety about him, or like an edginess, a nervousness. He just doesn't seem self-assured. And I was talking to one Republican operative who was making the point to me that it's true you could hurl the same accusations at Trump that people are hurling at Oz about phoniness and about past positions he may have held. Trump was media trained in a particular way
Hmm.
that made him well suited to handle antagonistic press, and he also had answers for questions that people were hurling at him. Whether or not they satisfied you or me, they made sense to the people that he was trying to appeal to. When he said, "Yeah, I supported Hillary because I bought and sold Hillary," maybe you or I said, "Well, what the hell does that have to do with anything?" But there were a lot of people who thought that was compelling. Oz does not, so far, seem to have a strategy for dealing with that. He doesn't seem as light on his feet or as charismatic, and I think that'll hurt him.
Yeah, it's one of those examples of, people who think that, success in one field transfers into politics. And this is kind of a obviously, part of this Trumpian era or post-Trumpian era, whatever, where people look at Donald Trump and think, hey, if he can run and win, why can't I?
Really, and
Herschel
look, I
Walker is running out, other
think
celebrities run, right? And.
yeah, and look, I mean, surgeons are famously arrogant and think that they're God. And everything that I heard about Oz from people who know him quite well is that this is a very very confident man who has very big ambitions and has never been shy about sharing those ambitions with the people around him. It was always clear he wanted to run for office. It was clear that he was a kind of social climbing, very savvy, shrewd negotiator with the world and was going to get what he wanted. He had told one friend who spoke to me, who's very upset about this race, that he wanted to run for president. So I think it's a combination of Trump sort of creating this environment where people like that feel empowered to go for it, and Dr. Oz having the type of personality that made him well suited for a kind of kooky endeavor like this to begin
What do
with.
they think he could be? So he did have one encounter with Donald Trump that you recount in the story. He actually had Dr. Oz had Trump on his show back in 2016, and miraculously Trump weighed in just below the BMI for obesity. And some of the producers were apparently furious over that. They thought that maybe that wasn't really on the up and up, which is, of
Yeah,
course,
I mean, I don't know
shocking.
if you remember this now. I've forgotten so much from the last several years of Trump, but Trump's crazy doctor at the time, the guy who kind of looked like Warren Zevon, if Warren Zevon had been like
Oh yeah,
electrocuted,
yeah.
he had this letter, praising Trump's good health, and Trump was not releasing more detailed medical records at the time during the election, and Dr. Oz came through and had Trump on the air and sort of certified his clean bill of health, and didn't press him too much. I mean, he acknowledged that he was overweight, and Trump talked about how
Mhm.
it's hard and he needs to lose weight, but it's hard with his lifestyle, something like that. But otherwise, just sort of let him off without too much trouble. And the producer I spoke with was saying, behind the scenes, they're all watching this and they're just saying, is anyone going to question him? Like, what are we doing? And people were horrified. As you can imagine, a lot of more left leaning people working in television, people were just horrified that Oz clearly liked Trump.
And did he fudge the numbers? I
I mean,
mean,
that I don't know, and I don't know if that would have been, Oz or Trump's doctor at the time, um, but Oz has been, he then had Ivanka Trump on the air during the administration, and he bought a house in Palm Beach, this $18 million estate that I drove past it in the course of my reporting, and I realized that around the corner when you
huh.
finally get away from the like residential estates there and you turn the corner, the first thing I saw was Anthony Weiner's brother's restaurant. I guess he had opened one up right by Dr. Oz's house in Palm Beach. I thought that was very amusing.
Oh,
But
this is like a collision of all the planets.
I
I
know, I
mean,
felt like yeah, it was very disorienting for me. But I he bought this estate in Palm Beach. I think it's like an $18 million estate in 2015. He bought it through a trust controlled by a lawyer who later was indicted during the Trump administration, incidentally, but that's another story. And he tried to kind of make himself a part of Palm Beach society. And he's still trying to do that. He was down there this past weekend for a party around New Year's. He's befriended some people in that world. He did a fundraiser a few weeks ago in New York with John Catsimatidis that Bo Dietl was at. Bo Dietl told me he gave him $5,000 and
okay.
hoping for the best. Bo Dietl's brother, incidentally, I love this story. I couldn't find a place for it in this piece, but working on anything about Dr. Oz, you have to reach out to so many random celebrities and random public figures. So besides reaching out to like Oprah and Martha Stewart and Dr. Phil and people like that, I realized that Bo Dietl's brother Frank had once sued Dr. Oz for promoting false health claims. And I called Bo Dietl and he said, yeah, I can't talk about that because he's got one of those, what do you call them? One of those NDAs.
Oh, really?
So I thought that was very amusing.
So you reached out to Oprah Winfrey, which, circling back to Dr. Oz is we're talking about Dr. Oz because because of Oprah Winfrey. Doesn't look like Oprah Winfrey's going to be helping him out that much.
No, her statement is, not a ringing endorsement, I guess you could say, to put it mildly. It sort of just acknowledges that, Dr. Oz, well, she doesn't call him Dr. Oz, that Mehmet Oz exists in the world and is running for office. And I think she says, and it's up to the people of Pennsylvania to decide, what to do about that. I'm paraphrasing.
Well, I thought it was awfully interesting, and I know that you did too on Twitter. Not a didn't seem to be a casual omittance that she didn't call him Doctor Oz. She just refers to him as Mehmet Oz.
Right. I mean, one of the only things to happen so far in this race, very little has happened. He hasn't been running that long. Is that the Philadelphia Inquirer made the decision to drop the doctor when they refer to him. So they refer to him in their coverage now as Mehmet Oz. And Oz responded to this by trying to spin it as an example of cancel culture. And he did this very dramatic video with the paper and said, "I will not be canceled," and it hasn't really worked in terms of a marketing ploy for him for the right, but it is one of the only events of this campaign so far, and so I find it very difficult to believe that there's any universe in which Oprah Winfrey, probably one of the greatest communicators of our time, made this decision to omit the doctor for no reason at all.
So, Olivia, you wind down the piece by pointing out that his wife once wrote about Dr. Oz that there had been a moment in his medical career when I got the sense that he was stagnating. And for Mehmet, that was tantamount to death. And so they talk about it, talk about the problem. And it became evident that he wanted a steeper learning curve, more variety in his routine, and the chance to have a bigger impact in the world. And the solution to that at that point was a television show. So now is this the solution is politics that this is Dr. Oz's latest chapter to keep his learning curve going?
Yeah, I mean, there obviously is a lot of guesswork involved in identifying someone's motives, and it's impossible to know for sure what is driving someone to do anything because people are inherently unknowable, and all of the caveats apply. But it seems like Dr. Oz is just one of those people who climbs mountains. That's what he likes to do. That's how he approaches life. And when he's done with one challenge, he has to move on to the next one. And I talked to Frank Bruni a lot
Mhm.
from the Times. Going when I was going about this reporting, he was kind of my guide through the process, and he was extremely generous and helpful because he had written one of the best profiles of Oz, and he wrote it back in 2010 when Oz was really at the height. He had just been on the Time list. He was doing really well in the ratings. His show had recently launched, and he was still practicing medicine. He was still a surgeon. And through the course of his reporting, Bruni got a lot of access, unlike me. And through the course of his reporting, he kind of experienced for himself this incongruous dual nature of Dr. Oz's life, where on the one hand, he was producing this kind of brain dead television show where they're doing all sorts of goofy stuff to make health and medicine appealing to a mass audience. And he's hanging out at the set and the planning meetings and watching that unfurl. And then he's also watching him be a doctor. And at one point, even goes to an open heart surgery that he's performing, and he's in the room. And there's this incredible scene where Dr. Oz asks him if he's ever seen the soul before, and
Mhm.
calls him over to peer into this woman's chest cavity. And he points out this place in the chest
Ouch.
that he thinks is the most beautiful part of the human body because it's where everything connects by the heart. And it's this incredible moment. But I remember, Bernie told me that it was one of the he's one of the public figures that he's profiled who has really haunted him the most. And he stopped back a lot to that process because he could not for the life of him figure out why this guy seemed more interested in this dopey television show and this celebrity than in this incredible work
Hmm.
of, peering into the soul, and affecting people's lives on that level, and how he could be so flippant, basically, about the work that he was doing as a heart surgeon. He was strangely in that piece, openly blasé about it. And on the one hand, you could say, oh, well, maybe that's just him being, arrogant. That's another aspect of what a surgeon's personality is like. But on the other hand, it's sort of eerie and strange, and I thought it was interesting, and stuck with Bruni all that time. But I kept thinking about that, and I kept referring back to that piece, and reading that section over, when I was working on this, because it just struck me as so strange, so deeply strange, and so indicative of like what type of personality we're dealing with here. And in some ways, he's the perfect person for politics because he is interested in strategizing to like move up the next rank in life. That is clearly how he approaches things. And so I thought what his wife wrote in her book was really interesting, because she was sort of telling the story as like a story about their marriage, and a story about like, dealing with the person that she loves, and trying to figure him out, and knowing him on that level, identifying what the problem was, and helping to identify a fix for the problem. It was sort of like, it was not a disturbing story as she told it. It was sort of like, one time this happened to Mehmet, and we figured it out and moved on. And I thought that was really interesting, and probably explained what we were looking at here, because I'm always so confused, genuinely, when somebody gets into politics, because it makes no sense. It's a terrible life.
Right. Especially when you've been successful and you have a life and everything is good. Why would you want to subject yourself to that? It's a great question.
Yeah, not just that, but like Dr. Oz, even if you thought that he was like a witch doctor, or thought that he was a scam artist in the last 5, 6, 10 years, I would listen to the interviews that he would do with, Jordan Peterson or Ryan Holiday, people like that. And he was still nuanced in his thinking. Like, even when he was
Hmm.
clearly shifting rightward, it's not like he was a blowhard. He had a genuine curiosity, and like a lot of his content, and I think to produce that amount of content, again, to go back to that, you kind of have to just let other people talk. And so he did a lot of that. It was a lot of him
Hmm.
just saying, why is that for, and,
Yeah.
filling an hour that way. But he was genuinely curious, it seemed, and open minded, and, not overly simplistic thinker. And he's clearly a smart guy. I mean, just because you have degrees, obviously, it doesn't mean that you're, a great intellectual. You can be successful in one area, or, intelligent about one thing, and it doesn't have to apply across the board, obviously. But I was so perplexed by it, because it struck me that, there has to be a real dumbing down in order for this to work in this primary, or in, in any
Right.
Republican
Very
primary.
much so. Yeah.
And so not only are you looking at just a total like degradation of his quality of life, and like all of the obvious things, you've got people like me calling your wife and ruining your day. You've got, the Bulwark podcast ruining your day,
Hmm.
maybe. But you also have just like a destruction of your reputation intellectually, I think.
And for what does he want to
Right.
be a legislator? This is what's interesting. The people get into politics. Do they actually want to go and work on committees and bills and negotiate? There's this disconnect. It's almost as if running for office now is just a different brand of celebrity as opposed to the specific work that you're doing. So you make all of those sacrifices, do all of those things to do what? To sit at a Senate Labor Committee hearing all day.
Right. Or is it because it's a springboard to a higher office? I think,
Hmm.
in this case, it seems like there's a good possibility that it's the latter. But you're right. I talked to Congressman Brendan Boyle, who reps a district in Pennsylvania. He would have repped the House that Mehmet Oz is now claiming that he's renting from his father-in-law, but it's this like estate across from a country club. Before redistricting, Boyle would have been his representative if Dr. Oz actually lived there, which he does not. He lives in New Jersey. But he was talking about how fed up he is. I mean, Boyle is someone who, whatever you make of his politics, he really cares about policy.
Yeah,
He's
right.
like a total wonk. He's also the only person I've ever met who went to Harvard and did not volunteer that fact to me. Like
Amazing. A unicorn.
a total unicorn. Um, I actually made a joke. I said, "Well, I know you didn't go to Harvard because you would have told me." He said, "Actually, I did go to Harvard," but he is
By the way,
really
that is not a joke. I mean, people should try this in their lives. Honestly, I do think that people who went to Harvard are incapable of going more than 15 minutes. I would actually pay cash money if you found, somebody from Harvard who will not bring it up in some context in the first 15 minutes.
I mean, look, I'm a dropout, so all of that is like totally foreign to me, and I don't understand like why people over college age advertise where they went to college. But Boyle, he really cares about policy, and he's really, besides I think being ideologically repelled by people like Lauren Boebert or Marjorie Taylor Greene, he's just really fed up with these celebrity legislators who are not interested in sitting in like committee hearings and going over the fine details of
Yeah.
legislation. They don't give a shit about that. They want
Nope.
to get on Tucker or whatever the crazier equivalent of that is, Infowars. They want to be part of a culture war. They want to make memes. They do not want to make the country a better place through legislation, whatever their picture of that is. They're not interested in that. And so, he views Dr. Oz as very much being a part of that genre of politician. And I mean, I guess time will tell whether or not that is true. And it's perhaps it's difficult to judge someone during a Republican primary when they necessarily have to be dumbing themselves down and oversimplifying and speaking in meme. Maybe he'll surprise us if he makes it through and starts running a very nuanced campaign in a general election. I don't know, but this is someone who is very enamored with celebrity from his first brush with it.
Right. And of course, you make the point, don't underestimate somebody who's been on TV this long. I mean, that's I think one of the great takeaways from this time. I mean, can he win? Yeah, of course he can win. So do you have a sense of what Trump might do and whether that would be decisive in this primary if this hedge fund CEO McCormick gets in and Trump endorses him? Is that pretty much it for Oz? I mean, he's already got huge headwinds in the Republican Party. That seems to me to be would be almost fatal for somebody who's sort of counting on inheriting the MAGA Sean Parnell vote.
I don't know what Trump will do. I think there's a good chance that he doesn't get involved until the field winnows naturally. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I think it's very much worth paying attention to the fact that very senior Trump officials, people who are very close to him, are lined up to work for David McCormick. Hope Hicks is going to work for David McCormick. She's very close to Dina
Interesting.
Powell. Cliff Sims, who obviously had a kind of rocky
Yeah.
past in the Trump administration, he was fired and then wrote a tell-all, well, not really, a tell-some
Yeah.
book, a very
Yeah.
good book, but
Tell a bit. Yeah. No.
it was a very good book,
Mhm.
but a tell-some book called A Team of Vipers, and then he was welcomed back into the administration after that. He's lined up to work for David McCormick. There are a number of people who are advising David McCormick on an unofficial basis already who have very good relationships with Trump. And so I think that that could be influential. And it's totally possible that enough pressure is exerted that Dr. Oz drops out before he has to make a financial filing or something and disclose what that looks like. I don't know, but I do think David McCormick is also untested, and we have no idea how he's going to perform as a candidate, how he's going to be under pressure during a Fox News interview, how he's going to answer questions about Ray Dalio. And
Hmm.
he's the CEO of Bridgewater Associates, which is Ray Dalio's hedge fund. It's the largest in the world. And Ray Dalio, incidentally, is a close personal friend of Dr. Oz. So that's a little awkward. But I think it's a very uncertain situation so far, and I wouldn't say that Oz is like dead in the water in Pennsylvania. And I do think, I mean, I was very surprised by how willing the kind of MAGA universe operatives were to dismiss Oz, because I just kept saying, well, wait, but you could say all of this about Trump. Don't you see the appeal? And really, nobody was interested in that at all.
Isn't that interesting? Some of these things are non-transferable.
It's a very cliquish universe,
Mhm.
and it's really not about merit. you
Well, and
know,
there's and look, and the stakes are much higher than they were back in 2015. I mean, there's more of a universe. There's spoils to be divided. There are
Totally.
factions. So it's a very different. It's a very different environment than it was 5, 6 years ago now.
Totally. I think it's a totally different environment, but I think at the end of the day, it is a cliquish environment, and I think there's also just a lot of anxiety among Republicans about not fucking this up,
Yep.
and they really can't fuck Pennsylvania up, and so I think maybe they're going to decide that in their words, the globalist hedge fund guy is the safer bet. I don't
Yeah.
know, but
Yeah.
that's what it seems like it's trending toward right now.
Which heresy are they willing to swallow? If you have not read the article, it is fantastic. It is entertaining. It is insightful. The political life of Dr. Oz, his campaign to be the next Republican senator from Pennsylvania, is facing one major problem: Republicans in Pennsylvania. Olivia Nuzzi, the Washington correspondent for New York Magazine. Thank you so much for joining me and spending so much time with us today, Olivia.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We will be back tomorrow, January 6th. We'll do this all over again.